Okay, let me start. Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. So this is a very complex meetup. Okay, it's very difficult because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to, I've been running these meetups for about 4 years, and we've discussed a whole range of topics in psychology and philosophy. Now, human beings are very difficult to understand, and even the concepts that we use to describe ourselves, they're very different from each other. So it's like each person may be even using the same word, but they are referring to something else. So it's very difficult to talk about this because, and what maybe what you think is talking, people are actually not connecting. So what I'm trying to do here is that I'm trying to make it possible for people to talk to each other. And the basic idea of this, I got when we went through Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow. And there he has these concepts of system 1 and system 2. And what we found was that they're simple enough that and we went through the entire book, in the meetup. And what we found was that it created a common vocabulary that allowed us to talk about many psychological things that we did not have before. So even if I'm not talking about change of minds, I'm simply talking about being able to talk to each other about what do you think? And that is the big value that I got. And the same thing happened when we went through Carl Jung's 8 cognitive functions, psychological functions. That was also massive improvement of people who are very different from each other, being able to at least talk to each other. Now, what I found is that, and I'm a big fan of Kahneman and Jung, but what I found was that both these are kind of primarily psychological theories. And one of the greatest observations about human beings I've heard is by Jacob Bernowski. And this is in Ascent of Man, which I recommend very highly. That is one of the first documentaries ever made. He says that man is a social solitary, that in a very fundamental way, we are social. And in a very fundamental way, we are solitary. And both these are true. And these are very core parts of who we are. So you need something both at the psychological level or internal. We just heard a presentation on Bucky. You can think about inside and outside. So you need something to deal with the inside and something to deal with the outside. So I thought that needed to be expanded because both Kahneman and Jung are largely focused on the inside, with touching on the outside, but largely focused on the inside. And on the outside, just like Kahneman pointed out, that we have these two very different systems, the older system 1 and the newer system 2. Similarly, we have two different things going on in our social interaction. So that is a quick overview. And the diagram that I have kind of summarizes these, and it's a way of kind of thinking about the interactions with it together. So what I've been doing is, so far, normally what I would do is that whenever I would have an idea like this, I would go study on my own. Like 5-10 years ago, that's what I would have done, and push towards writing a book is what I would have done. But now I am committed. I really like this format of very deep conversation as you're developing ideas. So as soon as I did this, within 2 weeks, I started doing meetups on this. So I've done 2 meetups so far, and I have 2 more planned, today's and on Thursday. So I'm developing this idea as I go along, kind of taking in feedback from people. Okay, so today, what I'm going to do is that I've picked the top ideas which have been the most impactful in the last 4 years of Meetup. And I'm going to briefly describe them and then have you vote on them. And then we are going to try to see what these ideas are in terms of this very simple 4-part diagram that I have, and how we can get a better understanding of each of the ideas, and more importantly, how these ideas relate to each other. Because when we study an idea or when we study something, we get unusually focused on that particular thing, and you do not fully, or you're not fully cognizant of how it relates to other things. What is it that it's missing? So this is a way of, this is again something I learned from Mortimer Adler through great books. It's called the syntopical approach. You're trying to take different people's views on a given topic and you're relating them to each other. So this, I'm hoping, is going to produce something interesting. I don't know how well this is going to go. I'm also trying a new technological, experiment of doing this. I'm going to use my iPad, and I'm actually going to draw these things out for you live during the meetup, so you can see it visually. Okay, so let's see how that goes, and whether Zoom cooperates. I've tested it, but let's see how it goes. Okay, so what I want to start off with is a poll. Okay, now 9 is a very large number. Okay, I'm going to reduce it. I'm going to skip Jung's cognitive functions because I think I will do a full meetup on it at some point, because that's, so let's just reduce it to about 8. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start a poll. Now, I want you to think of them 3 at a time, 3 ideas at a time, because 9 is so large a list that it is difficult to think of all of them together. You know what? Let's do a kind of a blind poll first, okay? Just go ahead. You can pick as many of these ideas as you would like to discuss. Don't pick all of them, because then that's like equivalent to no voting at all, okay? And we're going to, let's take a first poll. So I'm launching the poll. You can vote which ideas you would like to discuss. And you can go ahead and choose as many ideas that you would like to discuss. Focus, how about just keep it to at maximum 4. And I know that you may not know about some of the ideas. So if you do not know about the idea, then skip it. We are not trying to learn a new idea. We're trying to map ideas that we already know. So go ahead. We have got 2 votes so far. You can pick multiple ideas. Okay, you can pick up to 4. All right, got 8 votes so far. 11. Leslie, can you see the last one after Carl Jung's on your screen? Leslie, your voice is not working again. Oh, you're on mute. Just a second. Okay. Just a second. I'm going to unmute you. Yeah, there.
Yeah, I closed the quiz because I as a
oh sure
panelist,
that's fine.
not able to. So sorry, I didn't.
That's fine. That's fine. No problem. No problem. Okay, so I've got about 22 votes. So I'm going to give about 30 more seconds for people to vote. Okay, we got 23. That's a good sample. Okay, so last chance. Going once, going twice, gone. Okay, so let's share the results. Okay, folks, I can't, for some reason, I cannot read the last one after Carl Jung. Can you tell me the number of votes there? Oh, just a second. Just type it in the chat. The last one, how many votes it has. Okay. All right. So we got Definite purpose versus drifting. Order and chaos is very high. And then the next two is through darkness towards light. And then we've got, oh, physiology is 25, 6. Okay, so we have to do that. So, okay, so what we're going to do is, let's see here. So currently we've got physiology, order and chaos. Okay, definite purpose. And then the next two are through darkness. That's Carl Jung's idea, and authentic relating, and that's Carl Rogers' idea. Okay, so those are the five. So we'll start with the first three: physical, physiology and emotion, physiology of emotions, order and chaos, and definite purpose. And then we will go to the other two. So I'm going to stop sharing the poll. All right. So what we're going to do is Leslie is going to help me. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to start by describing each of the ideas first. So it's going to be, physiology and emotions first. Then we will do definite purpose, and then we will do order and chaos. So we'll go one by one, and then we will try to diagram this. So give me just a second. I'm going to try to get my iPad going. This is the point of suspense, because if we do this, it's going to be quite awesome. Okay. All right. Let me go ahead and cut the volume out. And okay, let's try that. Screen broadcast. Okay, let me see. All right, folks. Can you, Leslie, can you see the screen?
Yes, I see 4 images, yes.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. All right, so I'm going to work with this in just a second. All right. So we will start with the first one. So I want to describe to you. Are you guys getting an echo or anything? Is the sound good, Leslie?
The sound is good. I might just mute myself so that when you're speaking.
Sure.
But the sound is good.
All right, folks. Okay, so this is the diagram. Give me a second. Let me see if I can cut this out. All right. So this is the summary of what I see as the human condition. Okay. Let's first start in the horizontal axis. Okay, the horizontal axis is fundamental. Just a second. Give me a second. Again, working on this. Okay. All right. So this horizontal axis is fundamental. We have a biological nature. We are human beings. We are biological beings. We evolved over millions of years, and we have a certain nature as a result of that. Cities are relatively new. only 5,000-year-old. That produces a context which is dramatically different. Okay, so first let's talk about the biological nature. We evolved in African savannas in a group of about 30 people. And all these 30 people we lived with all our lives, people whom we're intimately familiar with. We have got these big brains. We are able to deal with each other, with people we know, amazingly well. We can see their slightest emotions, their slightest inclinations. We can respond to each other. We can work together. And we can do all of that wordlessly. Okay, it's very, very rare. And this 30 group of 30 people we're the top predators in the world. It's an amazing feature. So the first part I want to talk about is this one right here. I'm calling it family. In the evolutionary context, it would be the tribe, in which, so it's kind of, the tribe is essentially extended family. Okay, as mammals, as primates, that's our heritage. That's how we grew. That's a core part of who we are. We can't understand our current situation without knowing this, without fully understanding it. Next, I want to talk about this part over here. Okay, so this whole thing together, this is our evolutionary heritage. I talked about the physical situation outside. You know, we are 30 people who live together in relatively stable environment. That is the outside situation. Now let's look at the situation inside. What we have is we have these giant brains, huge brains that are able to see patterns and act on them amazingly well. This is what Daniel Kahneman calls system one, our automatic, emotional, intuitive faculty. And these two together, this is our primary equipment of dealing with our evolutionary context, and it is superb for that context. Okay, so this entire side, I'm trying to point to my screen, but this entire area, this is the evolutionary heritage that we have. Okay, so that's point number one. What happens is that with the advent of cities, something dramatic happens. If you look at, and this is in the area of anthropology, when you look at development of cities, when you move from a tribe of 30 people that whom you have known all your life to living in a city of 5,000 people, that's a dramatic change. Several things, several dramatic innovations happened around the same time. Number one is agriculture. Second is cities. Third is writing. Fourth is monarchies or kind of uh, rituals, monuments, religion combined with rituals, fairly advanced religions, worldviews. All of these developed together at the advent of cities. You know, places like Çatalhöyük, Ur, um, you know, then in Mohenjo-daro in India, the same thing happens in China. Kind of independent, but it's all of these things together. Now, what is the meaning of this? What is the nature of this? So this entire part of the world over here, this part is only post cities. That's why I call it metropolitan. I struggled a lot with what to call it. Called it urban. I called it many things, but metropolitan, cosmopolitan. The core thing is that this is moving from dealing with people that you know at a social level, moving from dealing with people that you know well in your tribe and trust to dealing with people in general. So in a city of 5,000 people, You're dealing with people whom you do not know. In an African savanna, when you encounter a person you do not know, it's immediate danger. And the most common response is war, okay, and killing. Whereas cities, everything about the cities is structured so that um, people can live peacefully in a larger group of people. So that's a remarkable achievement. Okay. Um, Leslie, can I ask you for a favor?
Yes.
If can you click on the participant window?
Yes, and I'm on an iPad, so I might not have all the same features, but yes.
Okay. Do you see anybody in the waiting room?
Yes, I will let that person in. Do you want me
Yes.
to let everyone in who's in the waiting
Yes.
room? Okay.
Yes.
I'll keep an eye on that then. Thanks. I'll
Okay.
do that for
Thank
you.
you. Thank you. Appreciate it. It's difficult to do when I'm sharing the screen.
Yes.
You know what? Let me see if I can do that. Yeah, I can still do that. Okay. All right, Leslie. I figured out a way of doing that. So that's fine.
Okay.
Okay. I'll do it. So what I'm saying is that this division between our biological heritage and our metropolitan existence is a fundamental division. I've talked about it at this social level. Now let's talk about it in the inside level. Okay, we've talked about it at the outside level. What is it at the inside level? The best insight I have on this is from a person called Julian Jaynes. He's an anthropologist. And he points out that it is the writing that produces self-awareness. It is very difficult to be aware of what you are thinking while you're thinking. Writing makes possible self-awareness, and it brings you to a new level. Um, Another way of looking at it is that this is system 2 of Daniel Kahneman. This is your ability to deliberate, ability to bring in objective context, ability to apply principles that you have learned before. All of this functioning, and here I'm talking about this part. Okay, so this is system 2. This is your reasoning faculty. This is your deliberative faculty, which is very different from system 1. So that's what happens inside, that you develop this capacity. And I think that writing is a very crucial part of development of this. Now, so what you have here effectively is, let me go ahead and I'll get rid of this. Oops. What you have here is a movement from uh, a movement from here to here. Okay, so this is a division here. This side is biological, this side is what is needed. And you can see the echoes of that. So for example, people who live in a more primitive economy, or people who are in rural area, they will, a large part of what they do will be on the left-hand side, on this side. If you are more in a city area, you will have a greater percentage of this. It's all percentages. You have to remember that you need all of these things to be working and working well to be a good functioning individual. I see the general pattern here as being a spiral pattern. So what you're doing is that you're actually going in a spiral like this, and you keep breaking new ground. So for example, think of it as a sequence of somebody growing up. Initially when a child is born, they're born in a family. Their system 1, their brain is not fully developed yet. Then the next thing that happens is, as they grow up, their brain develops. Then they develop kind of a deliberative faculty, which enables them to deal with the economy. Then they have kids, and the cycle starts over. So you can think of it so there are many different ways of looking at it. It's a very simple model, but it allows you to think of many issues together. Okay, so that's a very quick overview of that. Now, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to open things up for questions. The questions just about this model, and then I'm going to apply it to all these various ideas. By the way, I just want show of hands. How many of you have listened to my presentation on this earlier? Because I've done two different meetups on this. Okay, all right. So a few people have read it, but many people have not. So I'm not assuming this. All right. So let me admit people here. Okay. All right. So now questions about this. So go ahead. If you have questions, our rules are very simple. To ask questions, you can raise your hand in Zoom or type an exclamation mark in the chat. I just want to make sure that this is, if you have any kind of clarificatory questions. Laura, can you keep your question brief? Go ahead. Laura? Okay, next up is Jim. Jim, go ahead.
No, wait, I'll be 1 second. I think your spiral should go the other way, not inward, but outward. You should be starting and moving the spiral outward.
No, I will explain all of that.
Okay.
I do think it is going, yeah, inward for a specific reason. That's a very good question. What I am, there's a very deep reason for that going inward. I'll explain that when we talk about order and chaos. Next up is Jim.
Yeah, well, I was looking at this and wondering if there are personality differences that come into play, or a left brain, right brain aspect. Because I find myself on the right half of this most of the time. And maybe that's because we're at my stage in life, but I tend to be kind of left brain dominance from doing a lot of conscious thinking about economic issues, and not a whole lot on the left side. Of course, my kids have all moved out.
Okay.
I don't trust my intuition, so there you go.
So you're saying you're mostly on the right-hand side or left-hand side?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, right-hand side.
All right. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, the full answer, I'm going to answer it in a little bit of detail because it kind of shows what this is doing. This is kind of this is basically integration of a lot of work that Carl Jung, it's kind of combination of Kahneman, Carl Jung, Julian Jaynes, Jonathan Haidt, stuff like that. So what you're referring to, the best way to put it is in terms of Carl Jung's concept. So this is the distinction between intuition, what he calls intuition, and thinking. So the yellow is thinking. So this is thinking, and this is intuition. So this will be I, this is T. The feeling is somewhere here between these. And then the sensory thing is mostly here, and some of it going like this, something like that. So that would be a very quick mapping from Carl Jung. So what happens is that there is definite personality differences. All of us can do all of these things, but the extent to which we do this varies. Partly, even at at birth, there are differences. I've noticed that, kids of the same parent, they're like, I have a couple of friends, they have both two boys. One of the boys, right from the beginning, like, before age, 1 month, was interested in interacting with people, whereas the other boy was interested in moving things around and moving around. And that was their kind of primary thing. And that then what happens is that, so there is something which is innate. Then there is something which is, if you spend more time on it, you build it up. And then also it depends on what kind of feedback you get. Suppose you're kind of slapped down if you try to do something which comes naturally to you, then you will not develop it as much. Um, and then there is a question of choice at a later stage. So there are kind of many things. It's like if you keep using it, you become stronger and stronger, and that becomes your go-to way of doing things. So clearly there is tremendous differences, and Carl Jung's functions do a good job of measuring it. The big five personalities do a good job of some job of measuring it. So there are all these methods of measuring, and there's clear differences. None of it is particularly strong scientifically. They're all kind of pointers, and you kind of have to use your own internal judgment to Laura, could you please keep yourself muted? There is a lot of background noise that is being added. Thank you. So absolutely. So there is that personality differences and things that result from that. And there are people, this division is very large division, people who are mostly focused on kind of sensory things and thinking things through and transforming the physical world, and people who are more kind of intuitive and feeling oriented and people oriented. So in terms of Carl Jung, it will be NF and ST. So NF is on this side, NF, and this side is kind of ST, something like that. These are very vague, very general patterns, but absolutely, I agree with you. Okay, next one up is Bob. Bob, you have a short question?
Sure, yeah, this just refers to the labeling of in your diagram. Is an alternative to nurturing local and an alternative to the economy global? That's just a suggestion.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, there are many ways, because what we're trying to do is that we're trying to capture all of human patterns in a very simple way that we can talk about it. So the choice of words is a judgment call. It is true that the entire this part is very much local, because you are focused on the people right around you, and inside you're focused on here and now, your reactions here and now. Whereas this other side is all global, where you have you're focused on all time, all space, across time. You're looking at the past to learn about things, and you're projecting far into the future. So that is certainly true. You're also thinking when you're deliberating. You're cognizant of all of this. I find that these terms that I have capture more of the context, and more kind of, it's a question of how do you use a word that pack as much as possible. But your observation is very good, that it is, this left-hand side is local and right-hand side is global. All right, Sana, go ahead.
Sorry, I'm having lunch, so I just want to know, how do we use this diagram to find similarities to connect with people? Like, I can tell how people are different based on these circumstances, internal and external. So how do we find a theme that we connect to other people, although we have all those differences? Like in this diagram, where do I find the similarities to connect with others?
Okay, that's an excellent question. So first step is that actually having a map of everything that is human allows you to at least see each other, even when you're different. Because, like, for example, before I learned about cognitive functions of Carl Jung, there were people that I would interact with whose manner of operation was so different that, and I would automatically tend to interpret everything that they were doing based on how it would be for me. But for them, it was something completely different. Simply my, as well as theirs, understanding it, that, oh, that's what you're doing and that's what I am doing, allows a level of communication, and it dissolves all the anger that comes, because you're saying, okay, how could you not know that I'm upset? But they don't perceive emotions. Or, you know, it's like, how could you not think through all of this? How didn't you know that this was? I say, no, I don't remember, keep track of all the details. So there is at least knowing that there is a difference allows us to see that. Then to kind of figure out how do you connect. In general, what I have found is to find what values you do hold in common. So you can kind of create a value map. This allows you to kind of create a value map. I'm just jumping ahead. This is just trying to answer the question as best as I can. I'm sure that, you know, a few weeks or a few months later, I'll have a much better, I'm going to go integrate this with Carl Jung. I'm going to integrate it with kind of interaction between people model. But all I would say now is simply, you have to understand what is it that you have in common, because that serves as a common base, and then see what is the difference. Understand what differences are actually kind of additive to strengths. So sometimes I found good interaction is not carbon copies of yourself. Good interaction for me typically is having a strong common base and then quite a bit of differences. So you can actually compensate and you can learn from each other and work together to produce a better effect than individually. So that would be my short answer. Next up is Joe. Joe, go ahead.
Okay, sorry about that. I'm just trying to process everything. So the nurturing and deliberate, is that kind of like if you had the left side, right side, would that be like system 1 and system 2? Because I know initially you had this as
Absolutely.
system 0.
Absolutely. It is, yeah. The purple one is system 1 and yellow one is system 2.
Okay.
Right brain is the purple one, left brain is this one. This is kind of approximate, yeah.
Okay, so when you drew the two circles, I was looking at it from the other angle as intuitive nurturing as another system 1, and then deliberate and conscious and economy as a system 2.
It's
so like that's where I was getting, because I know that it was initially system 0, 1, 2, and 3, but yeah, I split it differently. I'm sorry.
No, absolutely. No, you're completely right. I mean, it's like the left side is all system 1 like. So system 1 and system 2 terms, kind of the way Kahneman presents it, applies mostly to this top part, what is going on inside. And you can validly extend it, you know, over here like that.
Right, that's how I did it.
Right. So because what happens is that if you look at the nature of the family, it is very much kind of like you can look at system 1 as the psychological concomitant of a family, or you can look at family as a social concomitant. So it's like it flows together, it developed together. Whereas on the right hand side, or the system 2, economy is produced by system 2, in the sense that it is the thinking about the future, systematic planning. That is what is needed to kind of create transformation, large scale transformation in our surroundings, to make possible kind of cities and the modern life as we know. So it is very much has the same characteristics. And the reason for kind of dividing them is that it is adding this axis of inner and outer, internal. Go ahead.
And so that relationship between the transforming and the deliberating, or the deliberate, that's a conscious effort, right?
Yes.
Always. So that would be conducive with system 2. Okay.
Right.
So the sense of the economy is actually something that's transforming. You actually have to consciously do it.
Yes.
So you have to think about it. So it's systemic. So, okay. All right. I'm following.
Right. So you have to plan everything. But just to make things a little bit more complicated, what happens is that it is a spiral. So what happens is that whatever you plan kind of becomes part of your habits, and it kind of becomes part of your, so it kind of goes, whatever you create here, then ultimately is kind of pushed down into your system one. So it becomes habitual part of it, part of your life. So for example, let's take like the Indian system of the caste system or something like that. So people get used to doing certain economic things. So now they're doing the economic things with system one. Somebody had to figure it out first. So somebody had to figure out what needs to be done. Then they did it. And then it kind of gets back into the system one, becomes habitual. In order to go to the next level, you have to do one more cycle of that. Okay.
Would the reverse be change?
What do you mean?
So if I went in reverse and I wanted to change something, like, I mean, well, let me think that through. I have to think that through. I'm sorry.
Okay, sure.
I was asking too many questions.
Sure. Next one. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is, so firstly, looks like it's kind of okay. I've managed to communicate it somewhat. Now, what I want to do is that I want to now take some examples to see where the different ideas fit in. So now let's first talk about physiology shaping emotions. So this is Jordan Peterson's point about stand up straight, that if you stand up straight, you modify how you feel. You feel more confident. That also has impact on people around you. So the physical action changes your emotions. It changes reaction of other people to you, and that allows you to do things more than what you are able to do. So you can see that it is kind of starting in the physical realm outside. And this is very much biological. This is part of our primate heritage. Jordan Peterson talks about lobsters. It is certainly true for primates. And then it creates a certain kind of emotion. And then that comes back and affects the family. So it's like creating a loop over here. So that's the way in which I see that idea of using physical things to shape your emotions and thereby change the physical things. It's mostly in that realm that it works. So any questions about just this point, that the diagram, if I wanted to diagram the idea of physiology connecting emotions, it would be something like that. It would be a loop going back and forth between these two. Wen, go ahead. Wen, you need to unmute.
Oh, okay. I thought if you realize your this concept of physiology, then it would be a deliberating action, and bring it out to stand straight. It's not subconscious or not, anymore. So wouldn't that belong to the yellow part?
That's a very, very good question. See, what happens is that everything is in well, yes and no. Okay. So firstly, you have to see that, no matter what we try to talk about, all the other things would be included in some way. What this is doing is that it is leveraging something which is very old. It is leveraging something in the evolution system, but having this as a principle is you're saying this is a principle and this is what I need to do. So it is being directed from outside for sure. And what's going to happen is that it's also going to have an economic impact. Like the way, like for example, the way your coworkers are going to look at you, possible employers are going to look at you. So it's going to have an impact much larger than the people in your immediate family or anything like that. So it will have an economic impact too. But most of this phenomena of the cycle that is making it work is a very old circuit of kind of a virtuous or vicious circle between our physiological being and our psychological being. Does this make sense, Wen?
Yes, if it goes in the loop with the four thing combined,
Yes,
then
exactly.
yeah.
But your observation was correct. It is absolutely correct that it is, you can do it consciously. What happens is that some people kind of learn to use their body, and over time it becomes natural. That's how they immediately, they kind of by default act. For some people, you have to use deliberation to kind of remind yourself to have a better posture. Okay, next up is Shelley. Shelley, go ahead.
Yeah, I just was wondering if this applies to which when I like what you said about deliberating. I hadn't thought about that, so thanks for bringing that to my attention. But which does this apply to exercise affecting the way that you feel?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's the same point. The healthier you are, the more active you are, the better psyche, the better your position to have a better psychological, especially system one. So it's definitely the same. Go ahead.
So like when you're standing up straight, which I remember actually the day I decided to start doing that many decades ago, and it does work. But I don't really know why that works. So, I mean, is it affecting brain chemistry? Because I know as a runner, exercise completely 100% affects my brain chemistry. And is that the base of how that's playing out?
That's a huge topic, and it's very well researched. There are a number of books. It's a very complex system. It involves hormones. It involves all kinds of things. It also involves kind of feedback from other people as well. So it's all, I think, but it's very well understood. There are many books on it of exactly how it works and why it works, and that it works can be seen. What's that?
I'll read something on that then.
Yes. There are a number of people who've kind of spent a lot of time. I'll try to find recommendations for you.
Thank you.
Next up is Jackie. Go ahead.
Yes, hi. It's kind of building on Shelley's comment. I was interested in deliberate movement, but not just posture and exercise, things that are more intuitive and striving to build our consciousness, like yoga. Mm-hmm. Where that would fit in, and where we're actually combining the physical and some people might say levels of consciousness, as well as other kinds of movement, dance, whether we're talking Sufism or just natural dance. Where does that play in?
Absolutely. So see, this is so beautiful. There are amazing questions, and we are able to kind of explore kind of much wider things than even the questions. Because, for example, if you look at, let's say, the Chinese culture and the Indian culture, they understand this very well. So they have built this into their culture itself. Like yoga is done, or Tai Chi is a great example, where you are doing this, and it's, stand up straight is only a very basic example that somebody who has been blind to it can see it. Like if you look at somebody from China who's been doing Tai Chi from when they were a kid, they have this wisdom built into their body, and they're benefiting from it all the time. So it is a very complex thing, just like stand up straight is a single action. Doing Tai Chi all your life, or being a good, doing running on a regular basis. This is like a long-term way of doing that. But what I'm saying is that like cultures differ in there. So for example, if you look at the Chinese culture has this, there is a tremendous amount of thinking and action and just incorporation that has happened in the Chinese culture, in the concept of health that they have. Whereas the Western culture has been much better at this part. But so that's why, for example, yoga is kind of nice and cool, okay? And that is pointing to the weakness, actually, that it is something which is unusual. Like from a Chinese point of view, of course you do that. That's what everybody should be. Everybody does. Okay. So yeah, absolutely. Great observations. Joe, you're next.
So just a really quick question. don't answer it if it's too
Mm-hmm.
far off topic, but that you discussed going from the nurturing to family to deliberate to into conscious. Could
Mm-hmm.
you just explain that to me again? Because if we're going circular, you said you're interested in that link in particular earlier.
You mean the entire cycle?
Not the entire. It was like you had drawn, and I may have gotten it wrong. So with my
Mm-hmm.
notes, is that the nurturing family to deliberating in conscious.
Yeah. So
You said, and that's something that you cared about for one specific reason.
yeah, no, I mean, I think that's like, see, what happens is that when you look at child rearing, right? So when a child is born, their deliberative capacity is non-existent because prefrontal cortex has not developed yet at that age. So a core part of raising a child is all about firstly making sure that their system one develops well, and then they develop the ability of deliberation that then allows them. So it's like they start over here, then this develops automatically, then they have to be trained or helped to develop the deliberative faculty, which allows them to operate well with others and succeed. So and that's how, you know, all right. So
Thank you.
that was,
Thank you.
You're welcome. So let's go to the next one.
Shrikant, this is
Oh,
Leslie.
yes, Leslie. Yeah, sorry.
Oh,
Sorry.
yes,
Go ahead. What are your thoughts?
Jackie's question brought something to mind. We talked about how so deliberately you can physically change your posture and it starts to change your emotions, and then yoga is sort of a combination of a physical action and a thought, and that it can transform people. And I think read somewhere, and it's amazingly effective, that what we think affects our emotions. And the way it was described to me is if we think about something in the past that was very upsetting, at first we're only remembering it. It takes a few seconds of remembering for the body to kick in and release all those hormones where we start to feel it and relive it. And so if people find themselves reliving painful emotions from tough experiences, as soon as they start to think about that tough experience, they have a couple of seconds to divert their thoughts, because once their body gets flooded with all those hormones, that emotion is going to linger a while. But if they can quickly divert their thoughts, they turn off those hormones before they happen. And so it's interesting. This is like the standing up straight versus doing yoga versus turning off a specific harmful thought. Those are all on a continuum, but they all get to the same place of affecting peace of mind.
Sure, that's a great observation, Leslie. So let's broaden it. So for example, let's look at CBT, okay, idea of CBT and what it is, okay? So there are three things. There is cognition right here, okay? Then there is emotions is right here, okay? And then there is action somewhere here, okay? What most people try to do is that they wait for this to be right before doing this. So that's how they want to go, okay? Cognitive behavioral therapy is all about saying is that get this right. Get this right. Once you get this right, you go ahead and act based on that. And then that will allow you to transform your emotions over time. You have to be willing to act against emotions you know to be misguided. Even if you feel a certain way, you have to be willing to do that. And that over time, that action will change that. So that would be, this is what cognitive behavioral therapy would look like. Okay. Next up is, we're going to talk about definite purpose versus drifting. Okay. This is the idea of Napoleon Hill in a book called, so let me just stop sharing the screen for a moment. No, it's a big hassle stopping and starting to share. Folks, there is something where you can control the size of the screen. There is a screen divider in the middle, you can just move, so you can make the diagram as small as you want. And if you're, especially if you're on your computer, and you can, you can see the number of people, so you can play around between the speakers and the diagram as you wish. All right. So let me tell you a little bit about this book. This is a book by Napoleon Hill. It's called Outwitting the Devil. It's an amazing book. It's one of the best. It's definitely my favorite Napoleon Hill books. The most, to get you to read it, or this is what got me to read it, because it was published in 1931. But Napoleon Hill and his heirs chose not to publish it. And it was published only in 2010. Okay, for 70 years, it was considered to be so controversial. And so, so they didn't want to publish it. And the reason for that is that it is the deepest take on the human psyche that he ever produced. And he put it, very bluntly. He says, and it also, he's very direct in criticism of all kinds of systems that are all around us. One of the reasons that they were reluctant is the particular ploy that he uses throughout the book. The story of the book, the plot of the book, is that the author corners the devil, the real devil, and puts him in a position where he has to answer the questions truthfully. And devil simply describes what he does and how he does it. And his whole point is that an individual needs to have a purpose. If you don't have a purpose, then you drift. And devil's proposition is that all the drifters are mine. So if you drift, it's going to, Jordan Peterson's point is that you drift downhill. So that's it. It's not something which is like a tremendously deliberate evil thing that somebody is trying to do with a lot of thought. No. It's all about just drifting. And he makes that clear, sharp distinction between that. And he says, wait a minute, then why is it that the schools don't teach people? He says, well, so he basically, it's a very deep criticism of every system. So that's what it is about. So I recommend it very highly. It's a very short book. I think I decided to read it because somebody was doing a presentation on it, and I like to know what people are presenting on at my meetup. So I started reading it, browsing it, and I ended up reading the whole thing in a day, I think. So it's incredible. So I recommend it very highly. So with that, let me come back to the diagram. So clearly the point is between, drifting is right here. It is just system one. If you just use system one, you're just drifting, okay? And purpose is right here. So this is the issue. If you have purpose, you're still using system one, but you are monitoring and you're directing it, okay? And what he ends up doing, so the issue is primarily between system one and system two. And what he's showing is the impact of this issue on society, on family, on everything, all of your life. So he's saying, what is the role of purpose versus drifting in an individual's life? So that would be my summary of it. So I'm going to open it up for questions. If anybody has any questions on it, it's very simple.
This is Leslie. It fits with what I hear people say in a lot of different fields of thought or study, that there's really no such thing as the status quo. If we're not growing, we're dying. That there's no such thing as staying still, because our environment's changing and time is progressing. And there is no such thing as treading water, so I think this fits exactly with the idea that all drift is downhill.
Yep. Excellent. Excellent. So let's jump to, I'm going to keep order and chaos for last because it's the most complex. Let me go ahead. So the next one I want to take is authentic relating. Now that's the idea of Carl Rogers. Okay, it's a profound idea. So to give a very short introduction to it, this is idea also, both Carl Jung and Carl Rogers end up at this idea in different ways. So both of them think that human beings are magnificent creatures at our, we are all magnificent at our core. And both of them observe that, but the world is quite messed up. People are quite messed up. They are quite unhappy. That something is wrong somewhere. And each of them in their own way ask the question, why? What's wrong? Okay. And both of them in their own terminology, different terminologies, they have a very same, similar answer. Essentially their answer is, first, we have self-sabotaging ideas that we ourselves hold about ourselves, about other people, about reality, which stop us before we start. So it just stops us from actualizing what we can do. We ourselves cut it off. And second, on the top of that, we wear these massive shields. Jung calls it persona, that we use to try to protect ourselves against other people's by showing ourselves as something to others. And so it's like, you have these magnificent creatures, but with this, tremendously debilitating self-negating ideas and these shields banging against one another. That's what the world looks like. And the genius of Carl Rogers is his solution to the situation. He says, if you try to authentically relate to another human being, you end up dissolving your shield and their shield to some extent and undercutting these self-undercutting ideas. Not because they are particularly smarter than you, but simply because they're different. So their shields are different and their undercutting ideas are different. And if you're actually listening to them, it gives you an opportunity of fixing things for yourself, and they get an opportunity to fix things for themselves. And it's very simple idea, okay? So let me go ahead and put it in the diagram here. So what it is that, let's look at it. Whenever anything is complex, again, I'm just talking a little bit at the level of kind of method here. So whenever something is complex, you start by saying where it is not. So it's clearly not about economics. Okay, so it's not there. Okay, it is mostly what you're trying to fix. The problem is here. Okay, and what you're doing is that you're kind of doing almost like a family. You're treating the other person like family, as if they were your close friend. You have a level of empathy towards them. You have a level of trust towards them. So you are definitely leveraging this part, okay? And you're doing it deliberately, okay? So you are willing to look, willing to listen. So it's kind of like this. It's mostly operative here, but there is a very significant element of this. So this is how I see it. So I just want to open it to any questions. Leslie, you have any observations about authentic relating?
I'm thinking back about your description of how we evolved on the savannah, and And now this challenge is to treat everyone as if they are in our 30-person group on the savannah. And it's, to a significant extent, it's to throw caution to the wind, and because vulnerability is part of that authenticity, but it just, it's daring to live as we evolved. Even though our genes haven't changed, our genes evolved over millions of years on the savannah. And so who we're genetically programmed to be has not had time to change in 5,000 years. But it's saying, even though this new metropolitan environment scares us and we seem to be dysfunctional in it, maybe the key to it all is to go back to what was most essential about being on the savannah, that maybe they don't clash. Maybe the problem is the solution.
Let me put in one more idea here, though it was not on the program, to show kind of similar ideas and how you can plot similar ideas. There is another book that we looked at was Principles by Ray Dalio. And in there, he has an idea called radical transparency. Okay, power of radical transparency. So radical transparency, this is in a business context. And this is all about doing it deliberately. So that idea is somewhere here. Okay, but it is very similar. It's saying that if you're very honest in dealing with people and straightforward, dealing with people, acknowledge your weaknesses, you can grow faster. You can together do more. So it is all in a business context. So it is in that context, but it is kind of analogous to Carl Rogers' idea on this side. So let me go ahead. So next one is going to be, give me a second. So Deborah, you're next.
Okay, I was reminded of the deep problem we have about racism. Mm-hmm. And I know I've spoken in the breakout groups with a couple of people who are encountering some really serious problems with it, especially in light of the pandemic, being, if you're Asian, you're blamed for it or something by ignorant people. So I think this is a huge tragedy today, is the lack of empathy, and the a lot of people aren't recognizing our oneness. Mm-hmm. And getting really far away from it. So it seems to me that this is an analogy to what you're stating right here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, racism is very much of a kind of a tribalism of saying, kind of thinking, okay, I'm part of this particular tribe, and that is your primary motivation, primary worldview. You're just looking at and this is, each of the countries have their own versions of it. So for example, in India, it is like caste. It's like, are you part of my caste or are you not part of my caste? There are places where they say, okay, do you speak French or you don't speak French? So it's like, it's all different things, but it's all about kind of taking something which is not actually at the family level. Okay, caste is much larger than a family. Or so
yeah,
is,
but it's a
so
human
different language.
construct.
Yeah, it is. But what I'm saying is that it is trying to use something in here. It is trying to take something that ought to be here, that everybody should be equal and we should be able to deal with each other. And you're trying to kind of smuggle in something which is much more primitive and still trying to operate with that. Next up is Bob. Bob, go ahead. You had a question?
Yes. Once you leave the family and you're on the right-hand side of the diagram, what role does the government and leadership play in this scheme? Because you mentioned the caste system. So the government and leaders.
Yeah, I mean, what happens is that it's a spiral. So what happens is at every level, like the kind of economic system that you develop. So once you develop a certain economic system, it will transform the nature of the family in some way. So the way in which you relate to people at a personal level keeps changing. So at a much larger, on a larger level, look at how people relate to each other in the old world. Like, for example, I come from India. The way in which people relate to each other is far more deeper than people over here. In a more advanced place, I think the families become shorter. For example, they become nuclear families, whereas in older world, it's always extended families. So it's a much larger group of people. It has a very different feel. Also, there is kind of almost, people don't move around that much over there. People are living, let's say, imagine like a village in India. All the friends that you have, all the people around, they are kind of part of the extended tribe. But as the economy progresses, the notion of family also changes with it. So sorry, it was Bob G that I was calling for. Bob G, you had a question? No, okay, Shelley.
Oh, I just really had a comment. Just it
Go ahead.
sounds a lot like Brene Brown's work on vulnerability and the choice to be, so that would be in that yellow section, deliberating, the choice to be courageous in being vulnerable. Although, Shrikant, I will tell you, and you expounded a little bit on this just a second ago about how when economy develops, family breaks down, because I will say, I see families, and even within my own family, there are people I am 100% unwilling to be vulnerable with, or am not comfortable being vulnerable with. Now, I'm not talking about my boys. Anyone on here knows I'm a mama, and I'm not talking about boys, but I am talking about other people in my family. And I don't think family is always, by maybe Western description, is a great descriptive always of vulnerability, although certainly it ought to be, right? It ought to be the prime example, but it doesn't always, it just from my, my own personal experiences and watching those of others, it doesn't always seem to be that way.
No, that's an excellent observation. So when you look at this part, right? When you look at this green part, in the evolutionary context, the family basically meant extended family, the tribe, okay? What I'm saying is that this is something, the kind of close relationships with others, that people who care about each other, that is needed for human beings. In the modern day, I mean, for me, it is kind of friends and family. I feel the same way about my friends like I feel about my family, sometimes even closer. Some people who are quote unquote in my family, they are not part of this. They are certainly not part of this. They are somewhere here in the
Exactly.
in the blue spot. So this one, it is what this diagram is trying to do is that it is trying to identify deep human needs which are persistent over time. Okay, so the way I see it is that it kind of goes like this, right? So at each level, so we are currently, for example, here, let's say, in this part, in the third level, given that we have tremendous mobility, tremendous ability to travel, to communicate with each other by choice, we actually create a family based on values. Like, like the people that you care about are the people whose, for me, it is the people whose character I respect. So it's Aristotle's concept of friendship based on virtue, and that is something, and because that is the thing which is most stable. See, it's in the evolutionary context over here, right? What was stable was the fact that you were physically with this group of 30 people. If you left those people, or if they left you, you would die, right? Here, in modern context, what is stable is the values of character. If I can count on somebody to be essentially the same or to do certain kinds of things, that provides a base for this. So I agree with you. So those definitions keep changing over time, but the role it plays in kind of human life, human condition, remains the same. It's just that it's over, depending on the situation, the way it is fulfilled is different. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, and that rings true to me. And I think when you look at it here, we have a very finite definition of what family is. Although I 100% agree with you that it's not that finite mom, dad, siblings, aunts, uncles, or whatever. We really do define that now. But I will say, I think at the heart of all humans is a deep longing to be connected with, what did you call it, that the core family, the mom, dad, siblings. There's a deep desire to be connected there. And therefore, when we don't have it for whatever reason, then we start bringing in people around us who, and I like what you said, I've not heard that before about, what did you say? And Socrates said it about aligning
Aristotle.
Because of virtues.
Yeah.
Aristotle, because aligning because of virtue. I've got to read up on that. That I had not ever heard that before, and I love it because I think that is a good description of what I've done in my own life. So anyway, thank you for elaborating on it.
Thank you. Let's see, is there anybody else? Peggy, did you have something? Peggy, go ahead. Okay, next up is Wen. Wen, go ahead.
Yes. We actually, in a modern time, what we're living in right now, the time we're living in right now, I think family has changed, become a chosen family. What you choose people to be linking with with them together, we have, I mean, human beings have been struggling between self-preservation and surviving and thriving together. These are two spectrum. You in extreme situation, you concentrate on self-preservation, and whoever in the olden time, the tribe of the 30 people exactly is for that kind of a self-preservation. And then I think self-preservation right now the time we live in right now is completely very, very different. And the internet has created a way of broader communication, and so I think that it's creating a much more possibility and much more way of commuting, and we can go from one spectrum to the other spectrum, which is surviving and thriving together. Yeah.
Thank you, Wen. Okay, so we've covered about 3 of these things. That was I think that is, let me see, George, go ahead.
I'm part of the Buckminster Fuller Institute, and it's our connection to nature and what we think. And also a fan of Daniel Kahneman's work, and I look at that intuition, thinking fast and slow, and then also traumatic brain injury and how the brain recovers. The work of Joe Bolt Taylor is an easy read and a good one. My Stroke of Insight. And so if we look at nature, and instead of looking at everything from a human-centric point of view, look at everything from a nature-centric point of view and how we align with natural systems, then it gets a lot simpler. How we model the economy, what we consider true wealth, how we can share resources, and what we have control over, and where we're along for the ride. But I think that this idea of that Bucky had about people becoming global and our connections becoming global is interesting, because he was born in 1895, and as he was growing up, the radio came into his life. And so he remembered sitting with his family and listening to the radio. And then realizing that his parents started telling him to do things that they heard about on the radio. So he said, why am I listening to my parents? Why don't I just listen to the radio directly?
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, I think part of the reason we're so interested in news is because intuitively we know that what other people are thinking is going to ultimately affect us.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just a matter of it's out there. It is going to come into our lives like a rising tide. So that's a couple of things to share.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, George. Next up is Jeff.
You know, Shrikant, I was struck by what you just said with regard to Aristotle as well, friendship based on virtue. And so many other things just immediately became just lined up with that. In terms of evolution and seeking stability, you know, of course, you know, you're going to be able to act in an interdependent way and want to be interdependent with people who you believe are going to act honorably. And if we do seek connection, but we don't really seek connection with people that we don't trust. We're seeking connection with people with whom we maximize trust, which is always the number one thing that comes back regarding what every global survey regarding what people want from their leaders. They want to be able to trust them. And of course, radical transparency, radical honesty, mutual accountability, that's what trust is based on. And so it just struck me that all of those things, including this wonderful book called The Speed of Trust by Stephen Covey's son, Stephen M.R. Covey, where he talked about the combination of basically character, competence, and the capacity to be reliable, you know, is such a core thing. And it just seemed to me like that might be a subject worthy of further exploration, maybe at some meetup in the future. Just the, you know, kind of what we think of as trust, how to build it, how to find it, how to be a trustable person. It just seems to be the subject of so much discourse between people in so many different areas, whether it's business or politics or family or other kinds of relationships. Anyway, just a thought.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. So what I want to do, I think we have covered 3 examples. I think the examples are enough. What I want to do now is I want to open up the breakout rooms so we can talk about it for about 25 minutes, and we can come back and share the takeaways from there. So I'm opening up the breakout rooms now. Thanks. All right, folks, welcome back. It's time for takeaways. What are you walking away with? So we will start with Deborah, Joe, and Lisa.
Okay, I hope Joe doesn't mind if I kind of, I know he'll add on to what I say, but he and I were talking about just, thank you. He and I were talking about undoing something. So going back to like the intuitive nature of something and changing a system that might be developed by going backwards and thinking, okay, this system isn't working. Let's go back to our intuitive nature, our natural way of doing something, and let's reconstruct a better system of doing something. So I'll let Joseph add to that since he's next, right?
Yes, Joe, go ahead.
So yeah, I mean, basically the concept was, so you drew the circle going one way, and when I was asking earlier, so if you went the other way, would that be change? Because the idea that you would make a change in a system that would actually have a way of changing your intuitive thinking, because the system would then start to so that it would work in reverse. And I had a way of, I'm still writing it out of how to think about it.
Yeah.
But the reverse could be true, like it doesn't have to go one way. The other part was, does it have to go in order?
That's a good question. I think there is kind of causation happening, in every possible direction, because all of them are kind of simultaneous. You are living in the economy. You have close personal ties to your friends and family. You have a system 1 and you have a system 2 all at the same time. And each of them is like, for example, you would get an intuition about the economic system, context that you are in. And so I think there is a causation going all ways, in every direction. But the way I put this particular one is I wanted to keep the biological one on one side and the kind of economic one or metropolitan one on the other side. But there is causation throughout.
And there's another aspect that we talked about that I have to think about a little further, but maybe for a future discussion, is the idea of how free will fits into this process.
Absolutely, that's a big one.
Yeah, that would really actually be very interesting, because then you start to understand, really causation much more, much more efficiently. Anyway,
okay.
So I'll leave
folks, anybody who wants to skip, you can just type skip in the chat. So it's going to be Lisa, Jeff, and Christiane next.
Am I next, Lisa?
Yes,
okay.
Lisa.
Okay. Being stuck in trauma and fear is the enemy of happiness. That's what I'm taking away from the big picture. Thank you.
Excellent.
And it's a great meetup. Thank you for your time and energy.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. Next up is Jeff, Christiane, and Bob.
I would just build on Joseph's point there. Joseph, I think that the question is not only can they happen in reverse order, I think they can be initiated and impacted not only from any one of the 4, but also that all 4 are always all happening at once. And it's probably what makes things, feel a little complex, the more, of a kind of a total approach that we are intrigued by or interested in gaining at any given time. And at least that's the way it feels to me. And, part of the confusion as well as kind of the overall perspective that's gained from trying to maintain that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the most fundamental way for me is to think of them as functions, which are operative at the same time, which are kind of interacting with one another all the time. Because that's a much more kind of a dynamic kind of a picture, rather than kind of saying, okay, family and economy. You're saying nurturing, nurturing is going on all the time. Kind of transforming is going on all the time. Intuiting is going on all the time. Deliberating is going on all the time. They're all the way kind of, interacting with one another. Next up is Christiane, Bob, and Wenwen. Go ahead.
So the part I enjoyed the most was the authentic relating part with Carl Rogers and Carl Jung. I'm not very familiar with Carl Rogers, so my takeaway was to read up on him and his ideas. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Let's see, whom did I call on next? I forgot. Just a second. Okay, Bob.
Well, I'm a person who's fond of concepts, and I really like Shrikant's diagram. It's something to think about. How do we place these things? It's some, well, I think I said it. Okay. I like this diagram.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's see. Next up, let's do, so George, go ahead.
I think that we're living at this unique time, and if we each take what we've learned about the world and imagine how it could be working, as Bucky said, make the world work for 100% of humanity in the shortest possible time through spontaneous cooperation without ecological offense or the disadvantage of anyone. If we each come to that, with a fresh slate of how we could participate in that reality, collectively what humanity thinks about the state of the planet and where we will go will be where we go. It's not up to a politician. It's not up to a banker. It's, you know, how we all think and decide it will be is what it will be. So I look forward to thinking of the most positive future with all of you. Thanks.
Thank you, George. It's wonderful to have you here. Next up is John, Mike, and Marco. John, go ahead.
Well, it certainly has given me stuff to stir, and I'm grateful for that. And the one, again, as my head continues to stir with this, and will probably continue stirring with this for some time, no apologies necessary, that looking at the diagram, I think that what is necessary but inconvenient is that you've got these delineated areas, these boxes with labels, and in a way that's simple, but it's also creates its own limitations here. And so one notion that I have thinking about this is, well, where are we in our understanding of what is ultimately possible? And one way of thinking about this is start looking at what's happened with how we understand science and how we understand physics and the nature of reality. So 50 years ago, we thought atoms were little particles, and they were objects, and they just happened to be very, very tiny, but they were named and they were delineated. And then as more and more investigation was done, what we found was that no, they're not particles at all. They're just, the best you can say is they're almost energetic probabilities. And so I think that if I relax your diagram and think of these things in terms of being energetic probabilities or possibilities rather than hardcore determinations, then I began to have more fun with it. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, that's why, see, I'm planning all of this. This is like version 1. You see, I'm eager to actually talk to people about it, because I can get, John, I mean, your observations are fantastic. I mean, the point you were making earlier is that, you know, the notion of time, that's what I was working on this morning, of saying, okay, how do you show time in this? How do you show projections? So that's one thing. The second thing is that I've deliberately used those colors. So I can just do a fractal of these things. You know, I can have all of these kind of going from one to another, combining them, all kinds of stuff. So that's, you know, there's all kinds of stuff possible. So this is a start. But next up is Mike. Go ahead.
Okay. We just finished the Bucky Fuller's system theory. And you can define something in series of two variables, flatland, or you can define them in series of 4 variables in your map. When your discussion with Jeff just a minute ago says, how do you show more of the variables? And if you wanted to try to do this with more of the variables, his concept of system theory was to try and create a series of maps. Traditional systems theory builds black boxes with input-output transfer functions. He came up with that weird shape of interlocking triangle maps. He also had a situation where he, which was sort of offline here, that he tried to explain relativity to a 5-year-old niece by coming with a series of cylinders on the flat packs that short cardboards used to be made of when you sent your shirts out. So I would say that like Myers-Briggs, you could find things in terms of ENTJ and 4 variables, but to really come up with a true systems theory, you need to have an open-ended scheme where you can add more variables. And that's in physics, they have the standard equation that reduced it to something simpler. But each of those elements is a multi-dimensional tensor in the standard equation. So I think I can see where you're going, but like you were talking to Jeff, to extend and to several other people, how do you extend it to be to eliminate errors of the first kind and errors of the second kind and so forth?
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Next up is Marco, Roy, and Joel. Roy, Marco, go ahead.
Yeah, it definitely, I think it's a great diagram, and it explains a lot, and it definitely tied together a lot of the things that I was already thinking about, and I think it'll help just in sort of in day-to-day just thinking. I think as far as for me, how that goes for me, but I'm definitely looking forward to the next
Excellent. Next one I'm doing is on Thursday. I'm going to map all of 12 rules of Jordan Peterson into the map. So I'm going to be working with Roger and Claire, who know the rules, as much as I do, probably a little bit better. And we're going to be trying to map all of them into the map. So that's one. Let me see. Next up is Roy, followed by Joel, and then Leslie. Roy, would you like to speak? Okay, next one is Joel. Joel, are you there? Okay, Leslie.
I really liked the time you spent talking about authentic relating, and that even though the modern urban world seems so scary and foreign to where we evolved, if we just treat it like it's still safe, we actually might be safer. I like the idea that sometimes the solution is, and I know this is a summary of what I said before, but sometimes the problem contains its own solution. And I like the idea that part of your conclusion is that it actually just isn't as scary as we think it is. It's not as fundamentally different. It's thousands of times more people, but maybe it's not actually that dangerous overall.
All right, folks, thank you very much again for coming. I'm always grateful, and I will see you very soon. Bye.